I'm Eliot McKinley. This is Kevin Minkus. We participated in the US Soccer Hackathon this past July, and we're going to present our project, which we won the hackathon. So yeah, as you said, we don't work. We volunteer for American Soccer Analysis, which is, it's a website where we do lots of American soccer analysis. So we focus on MLS mainly. He said we were one of the best. I think we might be the only analytics website.
Yeah, that's true. Fair enough.
But before we get started, I just want to acknowledge some people. So again, thanks to Opta Pro for setting this all up, Ryan and Oliver, US Soccer for holding the hackathon, Ross who emceed it, Tyler gave us a lot of the data, and Burton did lots of work organizing it. And everybody at ASA, especially Drew, Harrison, Matthias, and Ian, who they're our editors, and they pay the hosting fees and things for us. So thanks to them. And please go check out that website. So again, here's our team. We had 5 members of our team. We'll just go through it. So Andrew Crago, who is in Chicago, but he couldn't make it now. He's a user interface architect at Britannica. He did our front end on our project. Ben Harrison is here, right here. He's an instructor of earth sciences at Central Michigan University. So he drove in this morning, I think, right? Andrew Smith, who's also here, is now a graduate of Northwestern University. I think he's looking for a job if anyone has something for him. Also in Chicago now. Kevin, data scientist.
Yep,
at
I'm
Monotate.
data scientist at a startup called Monotate in Philadelphia.
And I'm a research instructor at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville. So none of us are employed in soccer at the moment, at least. So our project was about modeling decision making in the final third. So one of the things we're motivated by is something like this. So what possesses John O'Shea to take a shot in this particular situation rather than making any other decision? You don't often get shots that end up behind you, I don't think. And also, can we quantify the LeBron James face? So when you see this all the time where a player is near the box and there may be someone wide open and at the 6, and then they end up taking a shot and blowing it over, and then everyone's what are you doing? You get the Cobra, surrender Cobra thing. So how can we quantify this kind of thing? So we did it using we had three different ways of doing this. So our first is to model player decisions whether to pass, shoot, or dribble based upon the spatial location of where these happen. And this was all done using a Gaussian process classification, and we'll show examples of all these things. Our second goal was to predict the likelihood that a possession will result in a shot or the value of that possession in an XG. So for these, we used generalized linear models. So we got an X shot value, so expected shots, or an XG possession. So the things that went into this are things like where the possession started, how fast it went, number of passes, number of dribbles, that kind of thing that went into the model. And then the third one is to measure the efficiency of player decision making versus the alternatives. So this was using causal inference via propensity score matching. So basically, when a player takes a shot, can you quantify what the value of that shot is versus an alternative? So, in this one position, was it actually a good idea or a bad idea to shoot or pass or dribble? So for Gaussian process classification, this is what these things look like. So you get 3 different maps. So we're only looking at the final third here. And on the left is passing. So going from basically this purple to green to yellow. The more yellow is the higher probabilities for the pass on the left, the shot in the middle, or take on or a dribble on the right. So you can see with Giovinco here, basically anytime he's around the top of the box, he's going to shoot. Whereas someone like Federico Higuain for Columbus, he's mainly going to pass. So he basically will never dribble. He'll pass in almost all circumstances except for right when he's around the penalty spot or in the box. So Giovinco is obviously known as someone who's just going to fire away, whereas Higuain may not. The hackathon also had data from the women's national team, also NWSL. So we took some data from the women's national team, and you could see, Megan Rapinoe, she's probably one of the best crossers in the history of the women's game, plays on the left. So you can see, she's got this very high probability of passing when she's out on the left side of the field there. And again, shooting is where you would expect your shots, and is not much of a dribbler, actually. Whereas Abby Wambach, so if you remember Abby Wambach, she was the greatest goal scorer in the history of women's soccer, who was basically a poacher, scoring a lot with her head. So again, her shooting propensity, is highest right there at that 6, where she's going to get it, just knock it in. And we can do other things with these, like break them down by game state. So this is showing Alphonso Davies, who just had that big money transfer to Bayern Munich. So on the top is when his team is ahead, the middle is when they're tied, and the bottom is when they're behind. And you can see he has different, he makes different decisions during these different game states, as you might expect. So you can see, he tends to actually pass more when they're tied, and when they're behind, he's actually shooting less, and will do more take-ons. Whereas someone like Albert Ellis, he seems pretty invariant to game state. So he's pretty much always, you can see on all these maps that he pretty much looks the same regardless if his team is ahead or behind. And this is a lot of work that Andrew did, and he published an article on game state on Atlanta United that was really interesting. And then looking at an expected shot model. So again, this was based upon possessions, and we could classify them whether or not there was a shot or not. And you can see that this is the bottom 20. So I took all seasons for players from 2016 to 2018 and looked at them. So, and as you'd expect, many of these bottom players are center backs and defensive midfielders. Michael Parkhurst here ended up taking like 1 shot all season, and so that gives us some confidence that this model is working. And looking at the top 20 shots, shooters, by expected shots since 2016, you see, Zlatan is number 1, as he should be with everything, right? So he, shoots. He's expected to shoot about 3 times per game, and if you look at the data, he actually does. This is all in open play. He actually does shoot about 3 times a game. So there's that. And then you can also look at who's actually not shooting as much as you would expect. So again, this is bottom 20 in MLS for all players since 2016. You can see the bottom here is Jack McBean. He's over in, I think, Colorado at the time. Taking 0.9 shots fewer per game than you would expect. He's a striker. You may or may not want that, depending on how you are. But then looking at the top expected shots, again, we see Giovinco. So even though he's taking lots of shots, he's actually taking more than would be expected. And you can see Giovinco's number 1. There's something with being named Sebastian, because Sebastian Saucedo's number 2. And also Giovinco in other years are down there as well. Villa, these are these guys. I'm a Columbus Crew fan, so Pedro Santos, he seemed to be taking a lot of shots this past season, and this kind of backs that up. And we have a little bit of a case study as well. So we're looking at Michael Bradley and Will Trapp. I see Trapp is misspelled here. So both of them are defensive midfielders. They've both captained the U.S. national team in recent years. Lots of people are not happy with Michael Bradley as being the captain, and after what happened in World Cup qualifying. But they're somewhat similar players. They're very good passing the ball. And so you may all remember this goal that Michael Bradley scored at the Azteca. This was in June of 2017. This is a pretty great goal. And we probably remember this a lot better if the outcome of World Cup qualifying was different. We might remember this rather than Trinidad. But when you look at what he was doing pre-goal, so these are his propensity maps to pass, shoot, and dribble before the goal was scored. So you can see basically he's going to pass almost everywhere. There's a slight, I don't know how well it projects on here, a slight haze kind of around the top of the 18 where he would shoot. But then after he'd scored that goal in the second, so this is MLS data. So he scored the goal for the U.S. national team. So he was playing in MLS. He scored the goal. He came back to MLS. And now you can see that he is now shooting a whole lot more from long range. So there was something in his decision-making that had changed. I'm not going to be an armchair psychologist too much, but perhaps when he scores, a 50-yard wonder goal, that he may have a little bit more confidence to go ahead and do that again. So the other player, Will Trapp. So this past summer, he scored this goal at the end of a game against Orlando. I will say, as a Crew fan, it was a very trying season for off-the-field reasons. That this gave us a ton of energy that that everything was going to be okay, which ended up being true. But anyway, he scored this goal, which again is an amazing goal. It's his first goal in years. Maybe his first goal. Is it his first goal for the crew? Second goal. Right. So here's what his maps look like pre-goal. So again, he's passing pretty much all the time. A little bit of a tiny bit of a probability for these long-range shots. But then after the goal, it's not too different. It looks like maybe his passing is a little bit lower, kind of a haze on the other things, but there's no hot spots. So it seems that perhaps what happened to Michael Bradley did not happen to Will Trapp. And when you actually look at these, we can do difference maps. So we take the pre minus the post, and we can see, with Bradley, it's not showing here the numbers too well, but on the left, again, it's passing. So he's less likely to pass when he's in those positions right on top of the box. His likelihood of shooting is up by about 20%. No difference on take-ons, whereas Trapp doesn't really have too much of a difference going on there. And again, we can quantify these. So we go back to our expected shot model, and we can see that before Bradley scored that goal, he was taking about a quarter of a shot less per game than would be expected. But then after that goal, he then went back basically to average. So he went from less likely to basically what you would expect from goals, whereas Trapp, didn't really change. So, according to this, it would say that Bradley was taking about one extra shot per 4 games after he scored that goal, whereas Trapp really didn't change. It'd be an extra shot per 100 or something. So that's not really going to be too significant. So that's one little vignette, and I'm going to hand it over to Kevin for some more.
Thanks, Eliot. So we're going to pivot a little bit to a different case study now to motivate some of the causal inference work that we did at the hackathon. And so I want to talk about the Red Bulls and their transformation in the attack under Chris Harmas. Chris Harmas took over sort of near the start of July, and a lot of the media narrative and the blogosphere narrative focused on how he sort of changed the team versus how they'd been playing under Jesse Marsh, right? The team was like a really high press, really direct attack. As soon as they win the ball, sort of go toward goal under Jesse Marsh. And while they still had the same sort of high press under Chris Harmas, they were a lot more methodical and patient in how they attacked. They were willing to make a few extra passes in order to maybe get a better shot rather than driving right at goal. And so you see this reflected in the graph on the right, and that is final third passes per shot under both coaches. So under Jesse Marsh, they were one of the more direct teams in the league, a little bit more than 7 final third passes for every shot they took. Under Chris Harmas, they became one of the less direct teams in the league. That number jumped up to about 10.1. And so the narrative is probably confirmed, at least according to that data, right? Some of that takes into account efficiency of being able to get shots off, but for the most part, that's a stylistic change in this case. And so we can look at how that led to a change in decision-making for players. So these are these difference maps that Eliot just showed, and this is for Tyler Adams. And so the things that are in red are things that Tyler Adams was choosing to do more of under Chris Harmas than under Jesse Marsh. The things that are in blue are the things that he was doing less of. And so his passing map is almost all red. So in most locations on the field, Tyler Adams, at most locations in the final third, Tyler Adams was much more likely to take a pass than attempt a shot after Chris Harmas took over. We can look at Bradley Wright Phillips, for example, and we see, for the most part, the same thing. He is more likely to pass in most locations, except right around the penalty spot. I'm not totally sure what the exact reason is for that, right? Maybe Chris Harmas' system was designed to get him shooting opportunities there in a way Jesse Marsh's system was not. So Bradley Wright Phillips was taking more shots right at that location. And so this, so far, is all sort of stylistic and descriptive, which is useful. Maybe it's especially useful in opposition analysis, right? Understanding where players choose to make certain decisions. But one question that comes to mind is, what about the quality of those decisions? How efficient are they? Are they choosing to pass when passing is advantageous? Are they choosing to shoot when shooting is advantageous? And does the quality of that decision making decline? Is there some cost to switching to Chris Harmas' new system? Is it harder for those players to make those decisions under a new sort of attack versus what they had been used to? And so that's where we sort of turned to causal inference. I'm going to take a step back and talk about what our model looked like real quick. Essentially what we want to do is, for scenarios where a player took a shot, we want to quantify the value of the alternatives that were available to that player. And so to do that, we're going to use propensity score matching. What that means is that we're going to find similar scenarios in terms of our expected shots model. So scenarios that are similar according to how the possession evolved, where on the field the ball is, how close to goal it is, what the speed of the possession is. So that's going to tell us what similar scenarios are, right? We'll say, too, this is all event data. If we had tracking data, we would probably have fewer sort of unmeasured confounders to mess with the specificity of our model. So this is an OK estimate. It's sort of a rough estimate of the value of those alternatives. But using that propensity matching, then what we can say is, with the expected goals value of the possession, we can say this is how much a shot was worth, and this is how much we think, based on other similar scenarios, the player doing something else would have been worth in terms of scoring a goal. And so this screenshot here sort of motivates that. This is Joseph Martinez taking a shot against Philadelphia. He's maybe 3 or 4 yards from goal. Andre Blake has sort of dove and missed for the cross at the near post. And so there, the value of the shot is really high, right? It's probably like a 0.8 xG shot or something like that. The value of all the alternatives, passing in that scenario or shooting, is really low. It's probably going to lower the value of the possession itself. And so this is a pretty easy decision for Joseph Martinez to make, right? He has an open goal, so obviously shoot the ball. But understanding the difficulty of that decision, is sort of quantified as the difference between the shot and everything else he could have done, is sort of important as we talk about the efficiency of decision making. And so the graph here on the left is sort of a first cut at understanding that efficiency. And so what that shows is the percentage of time a shot was taken where a shot was in fact worth more than the alternative, that the expected goals value of the shot was worth more than sort of the expected possession goals model of passing the ball or attempting to take on or do anything else. And it turns out that the Red Bulls actually chose what we could call the correct solution a higher percentage of the time under Chris Armas than under Jesse Marsh. They shot when shooting was the right thing to do about 68% of the time under Jesse Marsh. They did it 71% of the time under Chris Armas. And if we look at the graph on the right, that attempts to sort of show the difficulty of those decisions, right? That's just a distribution plot for the difference between the value of the shot and the value of the alternatives. So in general, it's pretty similar. So even though the context of those decisions being made is different, right? Chris Armas is asking his players to do different things in different parts of the field. The average difficulty, the general level of difficulty between those decisions is fairly similar between the two. This is sort of surprising, right? Chris Armas came in, implemented a new system, and still had his players making pretty efficient decisions, making the right decision a larger percentage of the time, which is interesting, right? We might not generally otherwise expect that. Some of that maybe comes from the uniqueness of the way Jesse Marsh asked the team to play. That high press direct style is pretty different from maybe what a lot of players are used to before they come into the team. Whereas Chris Armas' system might be something more familiar, so that might be something to look at in the future. A second question is whether there was some cost in that efficiency of decision making that came from that switch. So essentially what I'd be interested in seeing is whether the decision making under Chris Armas got worse for a little bit, and then maybe as the team acclimated to that new system, whether it got better. And so that's what this chart is sort of an attempt to show. Mostly just pay attention to the stuff that is to the right of that red line, which is after Chris Armas took over. So you'll see that this is sort of a model for that change from game to game, right? We're controlling for coach effects and difficulty and opposition. And so what you'll see is it dips for the first 2 months of the season, so their decision-making, their modeled decision-making change did sort of get worse till about September, and then it got better. And so that probably speaks to some positive coaching from Chris Armas as he sort of acclimated his players to the new system that they were playing. Sort of the second case study that I want to look at from this is for Orlando City and how their defense changed during and after Jason Kreis's tenure. And so this is a difference plot of offenses facing Orlando City. And so you'll see from the pass graph on the left that teams passed a lot more against Orlando City after Jason Christ left, when James O'Connor took over, than during. And especially from that big patch, almost sort of in that half space on the left there, or on Orlando City's defense's right. And so this is interesting, right? Maybe teams playing Orlando City after Jason Christ left are actively choosing to pick on Shane O'Neill, who was the right center back there. Maybe James O'Connor's right fullback, Scott Sutter, a lot of the time pushed high up the field, and so teams thought that they could exploit space in behind him. But for whatever reason, players facing Orlando City were choosing to pass more from that location on the field. They're also choosing to shoot more at the top of the box. My guess is that there was more space against the James O'Connor Orlando City defense in that area, so they were able to get shots off sort of at the top of the box there. And then they're they're attempting take-ons less in that sort of half space region too, from which they're attempting more passes. So we can look at those same two metrics from before, and so teams playing Orlando City's defense under Jason Christ sort of made the correct decision, chose to shoot when shooting was optimal 77% of the time, which was the highest in the league, the worst measure in the league. After Christ left, that number ticked down to 70% of the time that teams chose to shoot when shooting was the best alternative. That's a pretty stark change, and so James O'Connor probably deserves some credit for that. This is also probably really highly correlated with the average shot quality, right? If Orlando City is giving up really good shots, those are going to be pretty easy decisions for the opposition to make. And so you see that reflected in the graph on the right, where the difference between shooting and the alternative is pretty spread out under Christ, and a bit less spread out under James O'Connor. It moves a little bit closer to the mean, to zero rather, under James O'Connor versus under Jason Christ. And we can look at that same change plot. There's not a huge, not anything hugely interesting about this, other than it's pretty flat game to game. And so maybe there wasn't a huge cost to switching. And it might be that that's just the case as a general rule, but there'd be something interesting to look at. And so then the last thing that I was interested in, that you're probably all interested in, is how does player decision making change? What percentage of time do players choose to shoot when that is in fact optimal? And so I built a model, a regression model, a Bayesian regression model, that takes into account the difficulty of the decision for each shot a player takes, to sort of account for that. And then what you'll see here is plotted the percentage for an average shot that the given player will choose to shoot when it is advantageous. And so these are the top 10 players for players that took more than 20 shots. Eliot Sanchez at the top, Tomas Martinez, Darren Esprilla. The ranking here isn't so important, right? You see the credible intervals. There's a lot of overlap between the players. But these are the top 10. These are guys that are generally good at choosing to shoot when it's advantageous for them to do so. I'll call out Alejandro Bedoya, who probably deserves to be a bit more revered by the analytics community. He's a guy that doesn't pop up as much popularly talking to fans, but he's a player that under a lot of other sort of deeper metrics shows up really well. He's really good here. It turns out he's really good at moving the ball from front to back. He's really good at playing out of a press. He has a whole bunch of qualities that don't necessarily show up in box score stats, but which look very good and impressive nonetheless. And so then here's the bottom 10 players. So we've got Justin Miram, all the way down to a couple of LAFC defensive mids, Mark Anthony Kaye, Benny Feilhaber, and then Keegan Rosenberry at the very bottom. And so probably the thing to point out here is that these are the types of players, right? These are a lot of fullbacks. These are a lot of guys that play further from goal. These are players that have the chance to make dumb decisions more often, to shoot from suboptimal situations, right? You wouldn't expect a center forward who's playing 10 yards from goal, or who gets the ball 10 yards from goal to make a whole lot of these decisions. One player I'll mention who does show up here, which is a little surprising, is Nemanja Nikolic. He's not on this list, but he's bottom 15 rather for sort of making this decision. And he's a guy that gets good shots right in front of goal a lot of the time, so we might not otherwise expect it. So that is something to think about further. I think that wraps up most of the stuff that we had worked on the hackathon.